Most of us know Ethiopia as a land ravaged by drought and famine. In 1984 and 85, the rains failed to water the poor, long-used soils. Crops perished, and starvation brought on a modern tragedy of biblical proportions. The terrible toll in human life was the awful cost of slow and relentless environmental destruction. Hopefully, we have all learned important lessons from that catastrophe. Conservation of the forests, the soil, and the water is now considered the best program for long-term famine relief in Ethiopia and elsewhere. Today, large sections of land that were not affected by the drought are being set aside as reserves and national parks. Perhaps the most spectacular of these is in the cold, windswept Bale Mountains. On its high plateaus, Ethiopia's rare and wonderful wildlife is flourishing. The mountain Nyala, once known as the Queen of Sheba's antelope, and the beautiful simian jackal are thriving. They are indicators of the health of the highlands and symbols of hope for Ethiopia's future. Antique highlands rising up out of thin air, a lost world of ice and water, mystery, fertility. The ancient Egyptians called it Land of God. The ancient Greeks, a cool celestial island. This was once the kingdom of Abyssinia, where Solomon and Sheba reigned almost 3,000 years ago. The land seems still to hold the essence of their wisdom and beauty. A haunting presence lingers on the wind. A wealth of unique animal life graces these highlands. This is the story of one region, its wildlife and its people, in an African country we now call Ethiopia. Feet high, these Table Mountains rise from the waste of equatorial Africa like an island from the sea. This lonely isolation has affected the course of both natural and human history. 40 million years ago, successive outpourings of molten rock created layers of lava up to 3 miles deep. The vast highlands of Ethiopia, the greatest concentration of high ground in Africa. These are the Bale Mountains, the southern end of the Ethiopian highlands. Much in these enigmatic lands remains mysterious, and this, the rarest member of the dog family, is no exception. It was first called the Abyssinian wolf, then misnamed as a fox. Scientists still find it difficult to classify either as a wolf or jackal. For the moment, it's grouped with jackals and called the simian jackal. Ethiopia is almost 3 times the size of California. Jackals once ranged over much of this vast land, but now their numbers have dropped dramatically. There are fewer than 1,000 left, most stranded on the isolated mountains of Bali. In some ways, simian jackals behave like wolves. Every morning, the family group sets off together like a wolf pack to patrol its territory. For more than 3,000 years, these highlands of eastern Africa have also seen human territories expand and contract as one great civilization gave way to another. Yet they remain wild, an unspoiled reservoir of natural wealth, rich in water and in wildlife. Just as with human societies, the lives of jackals are tied to the land. Natural resources are the key to life or death, and are more easily defended by these jackals acting as a team than by an individual trying to hold a territory alone. These jackals challenge the trespassers. Disputes are usually settled at a distance and rarely involve physical contact. Boundaries are reinforced by scent marking. "10,000 years ago, this mountaintop was stripped bare by glaciers. Now, shallow, fragile soil has slowly been built up to create the ideal terrain for simian jackals. And one strange species has been especially responsible for creating this topsoil, the giant mole rat. Giant mole rats are found only in the Bale Mountains. They weigh up to 2 pounds and dig extensive tunnel systems. Hill chats are quick to take advantage of this digging to feed on exposed insects. Mole rats spend most of their lives underground, only emerging cautiously to gather vegetation before dragging it below to feed. Over thousands of years, vegetation has been accumulated in nesting areas to form mounds up to 3 feet high. Essentially, giant mole rats plow the ground, and slowly they create new topsoil, priceless in a country which loses over 1 billion tons per year through erosion. In producing this topsoil, giant mole rats lay the foundation for an extraordinary richness of life. Grass rats, too, are common here. Of the 14 rodent species on these high moorlands, the 3 that dominate are found only here. In each square mile, up to 20,000 rodents harvest the flourishing vegetation. Simian jackals evolved to profit from this vast rodent resource. For most of the day, the jackals hunt alone, abandoning their wolf-like social life to become more like other jackals. They've developed a variety of skillful hunting techniques so that rodents are seldom safe, even underground. Blowing down into a hole may flush a rodent out of another exit. Long legs and a long, narrow muzzle combine to make a jackal a well-equipped rat catcher. These rats live in colonies, so once one has been caught, usually more can be found with only a little effort. Isolated on these plateaus, simian jackals are at the top of a pyramid of life, built on the base created by giant mole rats. And so jackal numbers are the most accurate reflection of the health of the whole environment. When simian jackals were first discovered by science in 1838, they ranged over all the northern highlands of Wello, Tigray, Eritrea. Here in Bali, rodents are most numerous at the start of the dry season. This is the best time for jackals to raise their young, and the whole pack has a communal responsibility to feed and guard the puppies. This young female from last year's litter is not the cub's mother, but she's brought her catch to regurgitate for them. Packs vary in size from 5 to 12 animals. Only one member dominates the pack, the prime male. But one female ranks above other females in the strictly enforced hierarchy. This adolescent, a subordinate female, nervously greets a dominant member. It's only the dominant female that gives birth and suckles young. This wild moorland once covered all the Ethiopian highlands, but over thousands of years the northern highlands were stripped bare, and jackal numbers began to fall, an omen of impending disaster. In recent times, the decline of the jackal population accelerated, indicating the dramatic degrading of the whole environment. Today, 500 miles away, the natural systems of northern Ethiopia are broken. Only a few jackals survive, and millions of people face a world of hunger. But here in Bali, for the moment, people flourish in a healthy environment, which also allows jackals and other rodent predators, like the auger buzzard, to thrive. Conditions in the dry season, combined with the quantity of rodents, attract huge numbers of birds of prey, one of the greatest concentrations in Africa. Like auger buzzards, lanner falcons are year-round residents. They use long, narrow wings to maneuver in the high winds, searching for sand grouse and other birds. The buzzards soar, scanning the ground below for prey. Great migrators, steppe and tawny eagles, also sweep through these skies, hunting for food on their long journey from Asia to the African plains. Jackals watch the steppe and tawny eagles with sharp eyes. Scavenging is easier than hunting. For hundreds of years, Oromo pastoralists have led their flocks up to the high-altitude mineral springs. An early traveler wrote of the Bale Mountains, Siberia by night, Sahara by day. In the heat of midday, temperatures climb above 80 degrees, and in the dry season can drop to below zero at night. The spot-breasted plover is one of a number of unique creatures that has evolved as a result of these sudden, startling extremes. The jackals have their own rational way of coping with the midday sun. This land of harsh contrasts attracts animals which evolved in similar conditions in other parts of the world. The wattled crane of southern Africa, the red-billed chough of Europe and Asia, After hunting alone during the day, jackals return to the den area and social life in the cool of the evening. Intense interactions reinforce the social order within the pack. This, the best preserved part of the whole massive highland area, has not survived into the 20th century accidentally. The success of its preservation is one of the most remarkable conservation stories in Africa. Wildlife Wildlife scouts are patrolling the lower slopes of the Bale Mountain National Park. Originally, it was created to save one species, the mountain nyala. Once known as the Queen of Sheba's antelope, the mountain nyala was only discovered by the Western world in 1910, the last of the major African mammals to be found. As late as the 1950s, almost nothing was known about this animal, or even about the Bale Mountains. Shortly afterwards, concerned people realized that an increasing human population, combined with hunting by the former aristocracy of Ethiopia, was bringing the mountain nyala dangerously close to extinction. So in 1969, the Bale Mountains National Park was created. At that time, naturalists could often sight only 10 nyala a month in the park, an area of 1,400 square miles. Today, 500 can be seen in a single afternoon. There have been radical political changes over the last 20 years, but even during the years of conflict and revolution, the park was protected, and mountain nyala numbers have risen steadily. This population boom of a critically endangered species is one of the most successful in Africa and a direct result of conservation efforts. Mature males frequently engage in their ritual struggle for dominance. The dominant males gain uncontested access to females. The park was established specifically to protect this endangered species. Now, however, the objectives have shifted to include all of this unique highland system, a rich natural inheritance. To the south of the plateau, steep slopes plunge almost 5,000 feet down to one of the largest remaining forests in Ethiopia, the Harena, crucial to the health of the whole region. Once, much of Ethiopia was wooded. Today, a minute fraction remains, under 3% of the original forest. In ancient Ethiopia, as elsewhere, empires were built and prospered on a base of natural resources. Treasured incense and myrrh were the gums tapped from forest trees. And even today, the wild coffee found here is vital for breeding disease-resistant coffee crops, Ethiopia's most important export. At these lower altitudes, the Harena forest is inhabited by more familiar African wildlife. Black and white colobus monkeys. Big cats such as leopards. And their smaller relatives, servals. Under the park's protection, mountain nyala are seen down here too. All three of Africa's wild pigs are found in the Harena: warthog, bush pig, and giant forest hog. Isolated from similar African forests for millions of years, the hyena lacks many species common to African forests. This gray duiker is found more often on the savanna, but it has moved in to take advantage of the available vegetation. And on these lower slopes, the ubiquitous serval is champion rat catcher. The thick, lush forest here soaks up and retains moisture throughout the dry season. But in the north, the lack of vegetation means the land loses the capacity to hold water. Without this, the land is bankrupt. The result can be famine. The high moorlands of the south still have their vegetation, and water is plentiful even at the end of the long dry season, 4 months without rain. The mountain ponds provide ideal conditions for migrant European waterfowl like these ruddy shelduck. And the specialist water birds of highland Ethiopia, blue-winged geese. Incredibly, their nearest relatives are shell geese, found at similar altitudes 8,000 miles away in the Andes of South America. Despite the natural grandeur of these mountains, the matchless landscapes, and the diversity of wildlife, this park, unlike others in Africa, exists without the support of tourist revenue. Only a few foreign visitors come here to see these unique birds. Spot-breasted plovers, and Satan Doro, the devil's chicken. We call it Rouget's rail. 27 species of birds are found only in Ethiopia. 16 of these are found within the park, another testimony to the health of this particular isolated environment. The ponds abound with life, and birds from several continents gather at these oases. Yellow-billed ducks collect in small flocks. A little grebe chick searches for its parent, which pecks at plants by the water's edge. A red-knobbed coot dives for vegetation. A sandpiper has come from Europe to winter in these high Ethiopian waters. A snipe pokes around for worms, insects, and small crustaceans. The relationship between these highland ponds and their diverse animals and plants produces flourishing moorland, which, like the forest, absorbs water and slowly releases it throughout the year, even in prolonged dry spells. Should the rains fail, these ponds are the precious reserve upon which the whole region depends. At the end of the dry season, the simian jackal puppies have reached adolescence successfully. Long periods without rain are common in Ethiopia, and natural systems have evolved to take them in their stride. But when the rains come, they are a welcome relief. The rainy period will last from March to October and transform the mountains. The heaviest rain is on the mountain slopes, where the Harinna forest receives an extravagant 40 inches a year. The forest has developed to control these rains, to moderate their impact on the land. Root systems absorb the rains like a sponge, allowing the soil to remain moist and productive. But when the rain falls 500 miles to the north, there is no longer any forest to soak up the water. Rain pours off the exposed slopes, sweeping away rocks and soil and creating huge gullies, the most serious form of erosion. On the highest mountain slopes, water falls in different forms: hail, sleet, and even snow, here in the middle of tropical Africa. High up on these mountains, life has been molded by these extremes. This hidden wilderness in Bali is a haunting memorial to all the ancient highlands of Ethiopia, which were once described as an earthly paradise. 15 feet high, the flower spikes of giant lobelias tower over the treeless moorland. And a profusion of red-hot pokers attracts seasonal visitors. Malachite sunbirds, female and male. Kakazi sunbirds. And with them, residents, the Ethiopian black-headed siskin. The olive thrush. And the streaky seed eater. But it's not just birds that travel up from the lower slopes. Wildlife has to share the fresh new growth with other visitors. This is the head of the Webb Valley, high up among the plateaus in the west of the Bale Mountains. For hundreds of years, the Oromo people have brought their cattle here to supplement their grazing. A close relationship between simian jackals and man has been forged from this long-established tradition. Jackals use cattle as cover in their hunts for unsuspecting rodents. Agriculture has been practiced in Ethiopia for 5,000 years, so this link with man is truly historic. The establishment of the Bale Mountains National Park included areas of traditional Oromo grazing lands. In the Webb Valley, the cattle keep the vegetation low, and this, when not taken to an extreme, can be beneficial for both rodents and jackals. There are more than 70 different languages spoken in Ethiopia today. The Oromo are one of the largest ethnic groups and migrated into the highlands from the south during the last few hundred years. But now these pastoralists are moving farther up the mountains as more and more of the lower plateaus are plowed up for settled agriculture. The depleted soils and reduced food production in the north adds to the pressures on the southern region. But conditions in this harsh and fragile land are less than ideal for any form of agriculture, even grazing. Unregulated cultivation and grazing could ultimately strip these southern highlands bare. The natural balance and interdependence of many creatures, worked out over thousands of years, would be destroyed in decades. This has already happened in northern Ethiopia, and the consequences here could be just as devastating. The most sensitive indicators for the health of this natural environment, simian jackals, face an even more insidious threat. Domestic dogs, which compete for food and carry dog diseases. Some jackals in the Webb Valley look unusual. Some have light coats. Some dark. Inbreeding among close relatives can occur when a small population is stranded in isolation. This may result in mutations, which are as serious for the future of the species as destruction of their habitats. Another problem is that domestic dogs may be reproducing with simian jackals. This threatening black animal, either wholly a dog or partly a dog, has become the dominant female of this jackal pack. Her alien genes are likely to be passed on to succeeding generations. Ways of managing these and other problems are being investigated jointly by the Ethiopian Wildlife Conservation Organization and the New York Zoological Society. Maintaining Bale Mountains National Park for future generations requires money, technology, time, and people. The effects of conservation reach beyond national boundaries. Through wet and dry seasons, there is a steady release of water from these mountains. 40 streams pour into 2 major river systems. Water is life. For the slender-billed chestnut-winged starling, the river waters and waterfalls also provide a home. Human civilizations, too, are totally dependent on the regular supply of water. The rich dynasties of ancient Egypt were based on the regular flooding of the Nile. Fertile silt and huge quantities of water have been washed down over centuries from the highlands of northern Ethiopia. "1,700 years ago, Heliodorus wrote of the Nile, 'This river, or God as you call it, is sent here by Ethiopia, which should therefore justly receive your adoration as the mother of your gods.'" Today, rivers still flow, heedless of political frontiers. This, the Wabi Shebele, has eroded a gorge 3,000 feet deep. The Bale Mountains are the source for 2 substantial rivers which breathe life into southern Ethiopia and even farther to the desert nation of Somalia. Damaging the Bale Mountains would endanger the lives of millions of people downstream. And the Bale Mountains also provide the foundation for a new and now vital part of Ethiopia's granary. These ripe wheat fields in Bali show that man can reap the benefits of a flourishing natural system, but there's a price to pay. Fertile lands encouraged settled agriculture, and over thousands of years, an increasing human population upset the balance, beginning a vicious downward spiral of decreased productivity, lowered living standards, and the ultimate horror of mass famine. Today, 500 miles to the north of here, in Wello, Tigray, and Eritrea, every acre of land loses up to 370 tons of soil each year. The normal dry seasons are prolonged. The whole environment has been destroyed. Wars and politics exacerbate a critical situation, but they are not the principal cause of a famine. The underlying cause of famine is environmental destruction. In 1984, when images of starving people finally aroused the world's conscience, it was already too late. The chance to save a unique living environment had already vanished into thin air. Too easily, these images from the recent past can turn into the reality of today. This is the ultimate price of environmental destruction. The land that first used the plow has been destroyed by the plow. The real cost of this destruction is incalculable in any terms. "40 years ago, these slopes in northern Ethiopia were covered by forests. Even conservative estimates suggest that it would take several hundred years to recreate a healthy environment on lands as badly degraded as these. The cost would be astronomical. Continuing to conserve the natural system here in southern Ethiopia would be comparatively cheap. Its future value is beyond price. So far, these rich lands of Bali have survived, but ironically, it is only the wildlife conservationists that have saved these highlands for future generations of mountain nyala, simian jackals, and people. This success has been achieved with very limited resources. The whole park is patrolled by only 13 wildlife scouts. The entire staff consists of 26 people. The future security of the park is truly up in the air. Until now, funds have come only from wildlife charities, such as the New York Zoological Society and the Worldwide Fund for Nature. But now, the park is facing increased pressure. In addition to wildlife, the fate of millions of people is inextricably linked to the fate of these lands. Compared with the billions of dollars it takes to rebuild shattered natural systems, it would take very little to maintain what is already here in this park. Conservation is a crucial part of famine prevention, but it rarely receives humanitarian aid. In a country with problems as extreme as Ethiopia's, some might say that investing in animals, like this endangered dog and its food supply, is contemptible. But the net result is vital in protecting people and their food supply. It may seem that these simian jackals are marooned on their mountain plateaus like those ancient Ethiopian empires, described as sleeping near 1,000 years, forgetful of the world by whom they were forgotten. But the world has not forgotten Ethiopia. Written almost 400 years ago, the words of John Donne today take on a broader meaning. No man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. King Solomon's wisdom would tell us that, as a part of the main, mankind is dependent on nature, on the quality of the soil, the water, and the magnificent creatures that flourish in these last wild places.
Next week on Nature, we'll see the picturesque landscape and interesting wildlife of the old sod. Be with us next Sunday evening at 7 when we visit Ireland, the Emerald Isle. Next on 11, researchers on Infinite Voyage will present evidence that there's validity to the statement, "You are what you eat." Stay tuned now for A Taste of Health.